We have a monster matchup in the SEC, a lot of really good matchups. We have Florida, LSU, and we also have Georgia, Tennessee. That is where College Game Day will be. Our girl Sam Rothman broke down this game from the Tennessee side just yesterday. Let's break it down from the Georgia side today with our buddy Jack Patterson. Jack, I know you have been wide open over the last couple of days. You have some really good high school football in your area that you cover. You also cover the Auburn Tigers, who are off to a nice start, as well as the Georgia Bulldogs, who are playing on this marquee stage. How are you, my man?
What's up and what's good, fellas? Yeah, man, listen, we stay busy over here on the state line, all right?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I know you do. This Georgia football team has kind of flown under the radar, I would say, a little bit this past year, mainly because they just haven't played anybody of note over the first two games. Took on Marshall, got a big win there, got another win last week. Now a big win against Tennessee, and a team that they have owned over the last, I would say, decade or so. How is this Georgia team preparing for what is supposed to be a really strong, really good environment there in Knoxville?
Yeah, it's never easy to go up to Rocky Top, guys. And Kirby Smart he's made it perfectly clear that it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult to go into Neyland Stadium. I mean, it's something that Georgia has done plenty of times in the past. In fact, Georgia is undefeated against Tennessee on the road. The only time they've lost to Tennessee was at home, and it's the only. Put it to you this way: I've been covering college football for this television station for 10 years now. Mm-hmm. I've seen Georgia lose one time in those 10 years at home, and it was the game I called a double Hail Mary game when Jacob Eason threw a Hail Mary to Riley Ridley for a touchdown to give Georgia the lead late. And then when Josh Dobbs hit Jawan Jennings, then that's the one that you've been seeing on repeat. That's the only time I've ever seen Georgia lose, period, at home, and that was against Tennessee. So Kirby has had plenty of success against the Vols, but he also knows that it will not be a cakewalk when they walk into Neyland Stadium on Saturday.
Tennessee has gotten the monkey off their back in a few different rivalries over the last few years. They had I think it was 15-game losing streak to Alabama, and then finally got the monkey off their back. And then now they take on a really good Georgia football team. Do you sense that Georgia is looking at this game a little bit differently than they have the previous 8? When obviously they've got those 8 straight wins. You see all the metrics there on your screen right now. Do you sense that they're taking this one a little bit differently, considering the fact that these are both playoff teams from a year ago, and Tennessee has looked really strong over the first 2 games?
Absolutely. And listen, Kirby and the Dogs, they're not going to, underwrite Tennessee by any stretch of the imagination, okay? That's one thing that I've never seen Kirby do, which is to take an opponent lightly. This is the guy who was mad about the performance last week against Austin Peay. And, he's not taking it lightly, and he's, basically telling his guys, he mentioned it in his presser earlier this week, that you can't, go in here thinking that you're just going to walk over these guys, okay? You have to be ready. You have to bring your A game, okay? This will not be easy. It will be a physical game. He said, he talked a lot about how Coach Hypo at Tennessee loves to have his guys really bang in the trenches. It's going to be a hard-fought game, and you're going to have to play 4 quarters if you're going to come out of Knoxville with the win.
Jack, I want to turn our attention to the quarterbacks here. Joey Aguilar over in Tennessee, Gunnar Stockton over at Georgia. Kind of a so-so start, I feel, for Stockton coming into this year. Obviously had to sit behind Carson Beck last year. What do you make of his first 2 games, and what do you see him doing against Tennessee?
Well, you look back to that Marshall game in week 1, and everything looked really good. He ran well, he threw it well, no real major issues. But then last week, it was kind of like, kind of gives everybody a little pause, right? 26 of 34, 227, it doesn't look terrible on the stat sheet until you realize, how many times Georgia, couldn't convert, drives, especially that one towards the end of the first half where they couldn't get into the end zone. They were inside the 10-yard line, and like I said, it's nothing, I would say let's sound the alarm, but it does give you a little bit of concern, okay? It's almost like, okay, and, I also want to, keep in mind that this is Stockton's 3rd start.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
He started the playoff game against Notre Dame. He started against Marshall. He started against Austin Peay. Okay. So you try to give him a little bit of grace there. Okay. That he's still learning. Okay. And the learning curve gets about as steep as Rocky Top coming up on Saturday. So I'm intrigued to see how he's going to react. It's also going to be a big, a big game for a lot of the new faces that we've seen on the Georgia offense this year. There's not, we're gone on the days of having, sure things like Lat McConkey and Brock Bowers and, guys like that, Trevor Etienne, now, is Dwight Phillips, is going to be guys like Nate Frazier, who is one of the guys who, he was on the team last year, but you didn't hear a lot of him. He's now one of the feature backs this year. And so it's going to, it's a lot of new names that people aren't familiar with. And it's going to be, okay, your first big test. You're going on the road to Knoxville to open up conference play. And, there's no warming up in the bullpen. Tennessee's looked fantastic so far this year. And, and that goes for the defense as well. Everybody's got to step up if Georgia's going to come out of this with a win.
Jack, I want to ask one more question about Stockton. I didn't really watch the game last week against Austin Peay, but I do know that there was a weather delay. How much of that do you think affected his play in that game?
I don't know, Patrick, to be honest. Because was he playing phenomenal before the weather delay? Honestly, no. Okay, it's not like he was playing lights out before the weather delay, and and after the weather delay is basically everybody just kind of gets to the end. Georgia scored a touchdown in every quarter, and but like I said, there were so many missed opportunities, and it wasn't just Stockton as well. There were drop passes, there were turnovers. It was a very un-Georgia-like game, if that makes sense. Okay, you don't see Georgia making a lot of turnovers. You don't see Georgia not converting on third down or fourth down. You don't see that a lot. Okay, and it was a very un-Georgia-like game. It's almost, and I think that's what Kirby was kind of sounding the alarm on. Hey guys, listen, wake up. You got away with it because it was FCS Austin Peay. Okay, that nonsense ain't gonna work on the road in Tennessee this week. So that was kind of the overarching sentiment from Kirby this week, is that hey, anything less than your A game, and we're going to leave Knoxville 2-1.
Absolutely. Coach Kirby Smart is such a great schemer. He also understands how to attack defenses and knows how to, get what he wants to get across as far as his game plan goes. The big news out of Tennessee this past week is that not just one, but both starting corners will not be in this game, in Jermon McCoy and Ricky Gibson. That said, with two starting corners out, do you expect the game plan to maybe not necessarily change on its head, but be tweaked a little bit to throw the football more, knowing they're throwing against backups there and using Gunnar Stockton's arm a little bit more this week?
You're going to see a bigger mix of both things, Gerhard. With Georgia, they have their wide receiver room is almost completely brand new. Okay, the only guys that you really remember from last year are London Humphreys and Cash Jones. Okay, and Dylan Bell. Everybody else is pretty much brand new. The Branch brothers, Kobe Young, is pretty much a brand new room. Okay, so I do think that you'll see more passing from Georgia, but I think you're going to see Stockton use his legs, because Stockton's an underrated runner, okay?
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be kind of the difference maker, that if you got those backup guys, it's not going to be so much, let's see if we can go bombing out on those guys. It's going to be, let's, find different ways to make you be on your toes. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think, seeing if Gunnar uses his legs more, I think that's going to be the key to watch.
Absolutely. Got a chance to hear from Kirby Smart on this big matchup there on Rocky Top.
Well, they've been really good games, right? When you play in the SEC and you're in these really tough top 10 matchups, top 25 matchups, they can go either way a lot of times. At the end of the day, they played us physical. We've played them physical. They've all been really, really tough physical games. I think being at home usually helps either team in terms of a road versus home. But I don't know that you can attribute it to anything, because this year has nothing to do with previous years. Well, I think it's a mental disposition, and it's part of your planning. There's certain things you can do at home that you can't do on the road. You have to be smart as a game planner, what kind of situations you put your team in, and where the field position is, what's the down and distance, and your approach to your game planning is, defensively and offensively, you have to think about that. And me being in this league for a long time, it plays a factor on the ability to execute when you're in an environment that maybe someone's never been in. and you have to be smart about what you're asking them to execute, because at the end of the day, that's what it is. Who can execute, who can block and tackle, and who can be physical.
Jack, coming into this football season, all the talk about Georgia was, yes, they're talented, but they're very, very young. Not a lot of guys with a lot of experience coming into this league, and Coach always referenced the fire, passion, and energy he wanted his guys to play with. How do they balance that fire, passion, and energy with going on the road at a place like Rocky Top, knowing that the crowd will be there and the energy will be in the building, and be able to harness that and play well? Because as he said, it all comes back down to execution there. How do you think those young guys will be able to handle that tough environment there in Knoxville?
See, that's the money word right there, execution. Okay, that's something that Coach Smart has kind of harped on. That he's like, if we don't execute, we can forget about coming away with this win. And this isn't Coach's first rodeo going into a hostile environment with a good Tennessee squad. Yeah. Okay, he's had to deal with that in the past and has been successful with it in the past, albeit not with guys that are this young. But at the same time, you do have guys who have been there and been a part of it, and this is not their first rodeo kind of experiencing that. And I think that pays dividends this week. Is that you don't have to worry about hey, these are guys that have never experienced being in a raucous atmosphere. Okay, that you've got guys who can help lead the younger guys, and I think that's kind of the big thing that Coach Smart has kind of set things up where you definitely want to have a veteran laden team, but when you can't have that, the next big thing for you is to have leaders who can get your guys ready to basically not play, for the lack of a better term, not play afraid. Okay, to be able to go in and get the job done. So like I said, when you have those leaders who have been there, and I know Stockton hasn't started in a road SEC game, but he's played in road SEC games before as Carson Beck's backup. So once again, it's not unfamiliar to some of the guys on that team, and I think that's going to be a big key. And once again, when you go play in these raucous atmospheres, it's never easy. And Coach Smart says the one thing we got to do is just go be ourselves.
No question about it. You cover Georgia, but you also cover the Auburn Tigers. And I want to talk about them for just a little bit.
Yes.
They went on the road, got a big win against Baylor. Then they come back home in their home opener, and there's really no hangover. I mean, they didn't look as strong as they typically do there in the first half, but really put it together for a strong second half. Jack, what do you make of this Auburn football team now ranked in the top 25? It blew my mind when I read the Auburn game notes that they have not been ranked in the top 25 since November of 2021. What do you make of what Hugh Freeze has put together over the first two games?
It's progress, Gerhard.
Yeah.
I think that's the word. It's progress, okay? The way I've kind of been describing it is that, when you really think about it, we're in recent years, you haven't been used to an Auburn team going on the road and getting a big win. Yeah. They do that against Baylor. Okay, in a game that a lot of people didn't really foresee them getting the win. Okay, and they won by 2 touchdowns. Okay, and then you come back home and Auburn has had their fair share of issues with non-conference opponents at home. The legend, a lot of people, think of Diego Pavia when he got to Vanderbilt. The legend of Diego Pavia was born at Jordan-Hare Stadium when he was at New Mexico State, and he beat Auburn that day. Okay. And, even before that, Auburn had a time when TJ Finley was a quarterback, they struggled with a Georgia State squad. So, they've had their fair share of struggles in non-conference games. Okay. So I think the impressive thing for me is that they handle business. Right. And I know, Auburn fans will say that shouldn't be impressive. Okay. But when you come from where this program has been in the last few years, being able to handle your business coming off a big road win over a Power 4 opponent, that's progress. Okay. And now you got one more non-conference game against South Alabama this week. And before you have a really tough opener to the SEC when you go on the road to play Oklahoma, and John Mateer looks fantastic. Yeah. So that's going to be a big, big test. But in my eyes, if you're an Auburn fan, you have to like what you see so far. Okay. As far as, the Baylor game, they had some issues, but they really kind of tied a lot of those issues up last week against Ball State. The defense was phenomenal. Sylvester Smith Xavier Atkins. They were flying around the field. The Auburn defense held Ball State to negative yards rushing. Okay, Jackson Arnold had a fantastic day through the air and on the ground. He had 4 different receivers that had over 35 yards receiving on the night. So, like I said, this is stuff we haven't seen from Auburn in a while. And and honestly, you get past South Alabama this week, and then, the real test is going to be, okay, what does this team look like in SEC play? And not only that, but on the road in SEC play. And that's going to be the test. Yeah. Okay. So like I said, Auburn looks good right now. It's progress. I think it's one of those things where you're cautiously optimistic. Okay. Mm-hmm. That you have to like what you see right now so far. Okay, because it's been so long since Auburn started the season 2-0.
That's true.
You have to like what you see so far, but at the same time, it's far from it's solid right now. Okay. Yeah. We'll circle back to this after the Oklahoma game, and we'll see, okay, how did they look against Oklahoma on the road? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, once you get into October, you got Georgia coming to town for that night game that everybody's talking about down here. So, like I said, I feel like people are starting to become more optimistic, but at the same time, they're still kind of reserved. And it's just because of what they've gone through, for essentially the better part of the last decade.